What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Pro vs. Pro, and congratulations to all of the Keegan Bradley outright winners. What do you think, Justin? Can we make it two in a row?
Yeah, I'm glad. I would guess hopefully we can make it two in a row. I wish I would have jumped on board and just put him in my DraftKings lineup. I think I'd have had a winner. So, he played awesome. I can't take anything away from him. Played really good. He did try to go full Keegan there the last 3 or 4 holes. He kind of
did.
And I'm interested to see how that carries over to this week. After struggling down the stretch, does that kind of – I know he still won, but does that hurt him mentally at all?
Yeah, we'll see. I also think it's worth noting, I don't know how closely you were following him Thursday and Friday, but he had a number of holes where it was like he hit a poor shot and then just made a bomb or chipped in or something. And it was just like it was always the perfect timing just to keep the momentum going and to keep him from getting into one of those positions where you can just kind of see like so many players are really good at hiding their emotions and their concern about things maybe starting to go the wrong way. You can always tell with Keegan once the doubt sits in. And it seemed like Thursday, Friday, every time there was risk of doubt setting in and having that bogey train get started, he made a long one for birdie. And it was like, all right, here we go. And next thing you knew, he had this really big, comfortable lead and was able to close it out.
Yeah, when him and Denny were tied, when they were tied for the lead there, I expected the things to kind of go the opposite way that it did. It's usually easier to maintain the ball striking than it is to continue to make all those long putts. But this week I was wrong. I would have the tendency to say if we are in that situation more often, I'm always going to lean with the guy that maybe is hitting the ball better than normal over the guy that's making more putts than normal, just because it's more sustainable to me.
And the thing that really stood out was once he got through Thursday, Friday, like on Saturday, when he started to make that charge, when he started to separate a little bit from Denny, it was actually just what you said there. It was ball striking. He just hit the ball to like 12 feet over and over and over again and started making those putts and was no longer relying on those long ones to get him out of jams. So it was a really, really impressive performance. And it gets to something that we've been talking about all season with Keegan, which is number one, like the volatility works in both directions, right? The exact same volatility that we saw lead to a missed cut, a disgusting missed cut, by the way, at the U.S. Open, then manifests itself in the opposite direction here at the Travelers for the win. And it was cool to see him like finally put 4 rounds together because his pattern all season has been he'd have 2 like weak winning rounds, but then his other 2 rounds where all he needed to do was tread water and he'd end up in contention, he just gave back half of his advantage, even more than that. So it was great to see him finally put 4 solid rounds together instead of have these like GPP winning type days and then give it right back.
Yeah, and dude, he hit it so good Sunday. Like, I mean, just quality shot after quality shot. And I'm starting to wonder if we're starting to see this tendency on tour in general of these guys that all seem to play better at the easier courses, and then the other side of that is the ones that play better at the tougher golf courses. And it's almost like they're playing. You don't play too many, or it doesn't seem to me like there's too many in between courses right now where maybe a 12 under wins. It seems to be like either mid single digit or mid 20s. There's not much of an in between, and we're kind of seeing that take shape. And I think you're going to see it again this week, that those guys that have played really good at TPC Craig Ranch last week are, I think you'll see that same type of leaderboard. Obviously, we talk about this all the time. The really, really good players are going to play good everywhere they go. Your top tier players. But I think that Austin Eckroat comes to mind. I love him this week simply because he's shown this year on courses like this, he seems to play better. Bent grass, softer, just that kind of golf course.
It's so interesting too, because I completely agree with this. I absolutely think that there are guys whose games and mentalities too, I think is a psychological thing as well. There are guys who are better suited for difficult scoring conditions. So there are guys better suited for easy scoring conditions. Interestingly, Keegan has actually profiled as the opposite from this win. He has definitely performed better on difficult courses. 2nd at Torrey Pines in the Farmers Insurance, 10th at Bay Hill in the API, 23rd at the Masters. 29th at the PGA, 30th at the Memorial. Like he typically, historically, has been one of these guys whose game steps up to the more difficult courses. And it makes sense too, right? Like because he's such a solid all-around ball striker. His short game is actually one of the more underrated short games on tour. And historically, when he has struggled, it's been with the putter. But as his putter has completely turned around this season, like he's actually been one of the better putters on tour for a few months. Now all of a sudden it brings into play the chance to win at such a low winning score. Yeah,
and we mentioned earlier, you were talking about him being on the Ryder Cup team this year and what that does for him. What do you think? I'm interested in your opinion, because playing against him with all his quirky movements and the way he attacks it, like when when you're up against that in a match play scenario, does that work in his benefit?
Yeah, I think to some degree it probably does. So right now he is in 7th in the Ryder Cup standings. The top 6 get automatic bids to the team, so he would have to be selected at the moment. But he's only a little bit behind Max Homa, a little bit behind Cantlay. So if he closes up the season strong, he absolutely has a chance to just earn his guaranteed spot on this team. I think the really interesting thing for Keegan when it comes to the Ryder Cup, as you said, like the weird mannerisms can get into the opponent's head, but the thing is, like, we've also seen it. He is so incredibly streaky from a psychological perspective that in a match play where you have a teammate, I wonder if he's maybe a little bit more prone to the good side of psychological Keegan than the bad side, where he has somebody else to rely on. He's not fully relying on himself. That could be an interesting angle. But then I also just remember, did you ever watch the Faraday episodes when they first came out on Golf Channel?
I didn't. I remember them being around, but I never watched much of it.
His was potentially my favorite one, and he told this story from his first Ryder Cup. He was paired with Phil, and he was super nervous on the first tee. He's talking about like it's a kind of nerves that he had never felt before, totally different than what he felt in a major or qualifying school, anything like that. And he said that he was basically looking for Phil to tell him something that would calm his nerves. And instead, Phil says to him, "I want 120 from the middle of the fairway. You better not miss this one." And it's the first tee shot. And Keegan's like shitting his pants, just worried about not whiffing. He was that nervous. And he bombs one like 360 down the middle. And he said it was like the greatest feeling he'd ever had in his entire life. Side note, I think that might be the last redeeming story for Phil Mickelson in the golf world. But I just remember that and think, Keegan might just have the mentality to be a really fun Ryder Cup guy, and certainly someone that you would enjoy playing with because of how fiery he can be.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think you've got on kind of the right track of this, or the same track as the way that I envision this working too, is he's in the match play mentality, I think you'll get more positive vibes from him, and not just that, but I just think he's soaring with confidence right now. And, there's something to be said about that. I mean, I would be really surprised with, you have converging trends here, right? Homa's not playing very good, and Keegan Bradley is playing really good right now. So I wouldn't be surprised to see those two switch spots by the end of the year. We'll just kind of wait and see there.
So the other really cool thing with Keegan is, like, when you think of Keegan Bradley, you think of the ball striking. You think, all right, this guy's fairly long off the tee. He's accurate off the tee. He's always been a great iron player. Since the Players' Championship, he has not lost strokes around the green. In fact, he's gaining considerably, event after event around the green. One of the most solid short games. In that same time, he's only lost strokes putting twice, and he's gaining strokes in bunches putting. So he's having this like really weird and encouraging transformation where these changes, I think, make him even better suited for match play, because going back to the match play this year, what was one of the things we talked about as being really important in match play? The ability to make putts, those 12-footers that Keegan made over and over this past week. That's why Sam Burns ended up closing that one out. So I think I'm like, we're really in on the Keegan Bradley Ryder Cup train all of a sudden.
Yeah. So how do you think he plays this week?
It's a good question because he's actually the first guy at the top, near the top of the board, who's showing value for us in the outright market. I don't know if I want to go right back to it, and it's not a big edge. Like we have him at 3.7% to win. His implied odds at I believe 30-1 are 3.3%. So it's not something that I'm like running to because there's so much value, and obviously it wouldn't take a whole lot of a dip from last week just emotionally and with the energy to take that value away. So I don't know if I'm going to bet it, but it's certainly an interesting question. I can say this for sure. If we get the traditional ownership discount coming off of a win where he's really contrarian and projecting as, the second or third most likely guy in the field to win, I'll be playing him in DraftKings.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised at all there, obviously. And I would say this would have been one of the few times I think that I would have gone back to a winner if we would have got an ownership discount. But I'm not going to, simply because of the way he finished. That showed to me that he was either doubting, run out of energy. There's mentally something happened there because he had performed so well. So I think that in itself will be enough to get me off of him, and especially with some of the value that I see elsewhere.
The only pushback that I have there is I think it was a really weird situation where he had such a big lead over so many like really big names that I think it's understandable that he felt almost uncomfortable by it. Like, when he was preparing in his mind for how he wanted the day to go, certainly he would have envisioned himself playing pretty much exactly as well as he played through the first like 11 holes, something like that. I mean, that was best case scenario for him. But I think even in that scenario, he would have been preparing to have to continue to keep his foot on the gas to some degree and not have like 4 or 5 strokes to work with all of a sudden, where it seems pretty easy to me to kind of empathize with how uncomfortable he may have felt in that moment. And as soon as you make one mistake, like all of a sudden that confidence just goes away. But he was able to stabilize a little bit towards the end. It certainly made some good swings down the stretch.
Yeah, well, I mean, in that finishing stretch, I mean, there's a lot of guys who made a lot of birdies coming down the stretch there. So, it's not like he was hitting a lot of high leverage shots and struggling. I mean, they were pretty easy shots. It's not like, and like I said, it could be, hey, let's just get this in and get our win and get out of here. But, it just would have been, in my mind, to see him close that out the way he had played all day, I think, and go ahead and win by 4 or 5 shots, I think would have done a little bit more for me. That being said, I had money on Thomas over Keegan last day, so I love seeing it to win by 1 shot.
I wanted to ask you specifically, you finished 7th in the $200 single entry this past week. Was there anything specific about your lineup that stood out to you as like really good process that you want to continue to do more?
So the way that I kind of built last week, I really like to try to get 2 guys that I think are top level talent, that top tier players, and be able to build them in the same lineup. So I was able to get Schauffele and Cantlay in the same lineup because I had such a good feeling about Reavie. So Reavie, I have to have a really good feeling to be able to do that. I have to have a guy that's, around basically 7,100 or below is kind of where I look. I mean, I'll give you a prime example. This week when I got to building, I saw Luke list as 7,100. I feel like if I, the way that he's playing, I can get him in a lineup and then get 2 of your, your top tier players into that lineup. It's a little bit different with a non-elevated event. But I think that's kind of what stood out. And you got to kind of get lucky with some of those guys. Obviously getting a little bit lucky with Denny playing really good. Reavie did what I, kind of played. He played better than what I expected, but he played really solid. What I expected him, to finish in the top 15 or 20. So, I think it just kind of, it's so crazy now looking back at it, like how good my lineup is to not win, like how hard it is to win that thing. And, I knew when I won it last year that it was hard, but like after that lineup that I had going, I was like, man, I cannot believe this lineup is not better. But it shows you how important it is to have the winner, especially in an event where the scores are so low.
I was about to say, I would be shocked if any of the 6 guys who finished above you didn't have Keegan in the lineup.
Yeah, I didn't go back and look, to be honest. I was pretty frustrated, and we had baseball games all day. So, well, I think we finished our last baseball game for my 7-year-old at like 10 o'clock. So if that tells you anything,
I believe it.
9:30. Yeah, I mean, I had 4 guys in the top 10, and then Shoffley finished 19th, and Woodland tied for 33rd. I mean, it's just crazy. Harmon finished 2nd, Reevy 4th, McCarthy 7th, Cantlay tied for 4th. Like, to have 4 guys, in the top 7 and still finish, 7th in that contest shows you how good some of the lineup construction can be. The winner in the contest had Keegan, Harmon, Connors, Henley, Scott, and Scheffler. So obviously Scheffler playing really good the last day helped him, or the last couple of days. So yeah, it's just one of those deals. And Shoffley got to go in there, and I was like, man, he could really win me this. He shot 4 under on the front 9, and Woodland had like 20 feet for eagle to get 3 in a row, and then doesn't get it down in 2. And I mean, my team literally played the par 5s over par the last day, and you just can't. You can't do that.
That's rough. Yeah, that's rough.
Oh.
So let's move forward to the Rocket Mortgage, and let's see if we can double up, go back to back on these outrights. We'll start with the course fit, kind of set the stage for the type of player that we're looking for with our outright bets. Full disclosure, I don't have any outrights placed yet. I have a handful of guys that I actually want to talk through with Justin before I make the final decision. Any bets that we do make will be posted as soon as possible in the bet tracker, and the betting preview will be out later today. Let's jump into some course fit. The surprising thing about this golf course, we talk all the time, like, we know that this is going to be a birdie fest, and typically birdie fests are about iron play, maybe accuracy off the tee, and putting. We get this massive weight here on both aspects of driving, over 25% to both driving distance and strokes gained driving accuracy. Really, really encouraging. It's reminiscent of TPC Craig Ranch, which, if you recall, was an incredible week at FTN. We had GPP winners all over the place. We had a massive prize picks week. And this is a similar course fit model on another golf course that should be a birdie fest. So really intrigued here. We do see a large signal on putting. No surprise there. As far as approach play is concerned, irons are down overall, but we do get this really strong signal, and Josh found the exact same thing in his analysis on half wedges, 50 yards to 100 yards, which I think meshes really, really well with the emphasis on driving, because basically what it's saying is, hey, if you are driving the ball long and straight, you're going to get a ton of scoring opportunities, and if you are good in that area, guess what? You're going to convert on a lot of those opportunities. So we have this really straightforward path, great off the tee, good with half wedges, can make your putts. That recipe is going to lead to a lot of birdies on this golf course, and it's going to put you at the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of like the first ones that stuck out to me, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We're going to kind of lean on the Craig Ranch stuff. Even I like the guys that played good last week that maybe we didn't pay much attention to, but they just had good solid weeks. Big fan of Cam Davis this week. I think he's getting it figured out. He hits it far, drives it good. Not afraid to make a bunch of birdies. Obviously back to Eckroat, as I already mentioned. Mentioned Luke List. I think he's trending the correct direction here. I mean, I like the guys that, as every week, right? The guys that drive it really good have just such a big advantage. I will be interested to see how if the greens are super soft. I'm guessing they will be. I know it's been pretty wet up north, so I'm gonna guess it's gonna be very, very similar to last week. Grass types, greens, everything.
So I am thrilled that you mentioned Luke List, because I kind of thought that I would be on an island here. List is actually showing as the top value play in our simulations in terms of the outright market. He's at 150 to 1 at PointsBet, Caesars, and then 130 at DraftKings, 125 at BetMGM. So that 150 number, that has an implied probability of 0.66%. We give him a 1.1% chance to win. He is both long and straight off the tee. He is good with his irons. He's good with his half wedges, but I will say the strength of his iron game is the long irons, maybe even some of the mid irons. So that's not a point in his favor, even though he's good in that area. The concerning point for him, of course, is the putting. It's always the putting. He's coming off a week in which he actually gained with the putter. His around the green play is showing signs of bouncing back. Historically, he was somebody who was much better around the greens than people realized, and then all of a sudden he completely lost that aspect of his game. So if we're seeing that come back, that's a really encouraging sign for him. You mentioned he's been playing well. He kind of has. There are signs of life from him. My biggest question and the concern that I want you to address as well is, we talked about guys who are better suited for tough scoring conditions and guys who are better suited for easy scoring conditions. I don't know if there's a single player on tour that I would say is more severely in favor of tough scoring conditions than Luke List. Do you think he has what it takes to win a shootout?
So the reason that I think he does, and where that, generally we see guys that high spin guys that hit it far play better at harder golf courses. Firmer greens is generally speaking. That's why the golf course is harder. I think that, and you also mentioned what he does well is his iron play. And at this golf course, most of your high leverage shots are going to be with irons into par fives and the par threes.
And that's real quick. That's why we see such an edge to both aspects of driving, by the way, because if you're getting these high leverage shots with your irons, it's a lot better to have a high leverage shot from 180 in the fairway than 210 out of the rough or something like that. So it's weird that the high leverage shot is with the iron, but then the predictive signal comes from off the tee play.
Yeah, and the thing about the half wedge shots, for the guys on tour and they know they've got to work on it, they're going to have perfect lies in the fairway and even the rough with soft greens. The bad ones are going to be 20 feet. You're not hitting it in the water from there. You're not hitting terrible shots. So I understand how important that could be. And if, this is playing, and I know this from playing as well. When you get going with that shot, you feel like you can hit it in the leather every time. And that doesn't, that's just the way it is. That's just the way golf is. You get that feeling of hey, I can control my spin. I'm controlling my distance well. I'm driving it good. I have a million of these shots and I can take advantage of it. And you'll see somebody, that's why I think you'll see a couple of super low scores because somebody just kind of gets in a groove of doing that. But all the par fives, it's weird that half wedge play comes into such a big deal here even though most of the guys are going to be hitting it on all the par fives.
Yeah, so I think it's coming from the par fours more than anything else. It's basically saying so many of these guys are going to be able to score on the par fives. It's hard to create an advantage over the field on the par fives because they're so easy. So you have to create that advantage on the par fours, and one of the ways you do that is by hitting those half wedges close.
Yeah, and then the other guy that I kind of want to mention that kind of fits into that same bill is Taylor Pendrith. I would be interested to see how you think he's going to perform. I think that this is a good golf course for him. Kind of fits the way he plays. He's played okay, maybe not his best lately, but he's not played horrible either. I think maybe he played horrible 1 week, the U.S. Open or something. But outside of that, he hasn't, he hasn't played great, but it hasn't been bad, and got a couple of top 20s. And I just feel like this just feels like a Taylor Pendrith type of golf course.
Yeah, I don't mind it. He's 100 to 1, and he's at 0.9% in our numbers to win. So it's not showing value, but it's also clearly not showing that it's a really bad bet. One guy I want to look at real quick, and then I want to go back to Luke List, is Joseph Bramlett, also 100 to 1, and Bramlett we have at 0.8%. So another one where it's it's in the ballpark, but probably not quite there. The thing that stood out to me about Bramlett, obviously, this guy is somebody who launches the ball off the tee. He's been a little bit more inaccurate off the tee of late than he was earlier in the season. But what stood out to me is he's really, really good with his half wedges. So maybe he's more of a DFS target. But back to Luke List for a second. When we talk about somebody who has difficult times on easy courses, consider this. In the last 3 seasons, he has reached 20 under par only once this season at the Tournament of Champions. That's the big concern for me. And I don't think this is an accident. Like, certainly you could point to some guys, say that sort of thing, and it would just be random. Like, he could be just as likely to go 20 under the next week if that's gaining, 2.5 strokes to the field as he would be to gain 2.5 strokes on a difficult course. With List, it's such a specific reason. It's that you, on really difficult golf courses, you can separate yourself from the field so much by driving the ball really well. When he was at his best, he also had a really good short game. So everything about his game is more conducive to making pars when others are making bogeys than making birdies when others are making birdies and pars. And so I think that he's going to struggle to put up a score good enough to win, even though I think he'll play well. And I think that makes him a better DFS target than an outright bet. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, I'm more focused on the DFS side than I do the betting side. Most of my betting stuff is just matchups. I don't play a lot of outright. So, but yeah, definitely, like, he was kind of that first one that kind of stood out to me on DraftKings is, for his price tag of, I'm not sure that there's a ton of value, maybe as a winner, but I like if he went out there and shot, 18 to 20 under and finished right around, 15th to 20th, I wouldn't be overly surprised. I think that's pretty much where I see him, playing out. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you can count on – the problem is counting on, like Keegan, although he did it, is counting on his putter down the stretch of, hey, if this guy gets in contention, can he keep going?
Yeah, fair. Very fair. Some other guys that I'm looking at, I mentioned that near the top, we do have Keegan, so potentially going there. I like the Cameron Davis call a lot. I think he's a solid fit. The interesting thing with Cameron Davis, and this is also the argument made for Keegan last week and another one this week, is his volatility is super high. In fact, above $8,000 on DraftKings, Cameron Davis is first in volatility at 2.98 strokes per round standard deviation. Keegan Bradley second at 2.96. So they're neck and neck with each other there. We know that Davis has the length. We know that historically he has won events. So I do like that call. I'll be considering him. I think the only other guy that I'm heavily considering right now is Davis Riley. We have him at 1% to win. I believe he's 90 to 1, so there's not quite value there. The thing that I like about Riley is, we just mentioned 2.98, 2.96 for Davis and Keegan when they're standard deviations. Davis Riley, the only guy in the field that's even remotely relevant who's above them at 3.08 per round. So we get like a ton of upside and of course a ton of downside with Davis Riley. What's so interesting to me, let's look at his last 3 weeks, and we get this really strange mix of awesome performances and bad performances. Specifically, at the Charles Schwab and the Memorial, he lost pretty much a stroke per round off the tee. Then he gained nearly a stroke per round driving at the Travelers. At the Schwab and the Memorial, he gained over a stroke per round with his irons. Then he lost over a stroke per round with his irons at the Travelers. So it's nice to see that he's performing really well in these categories where, yeah, he could have the bad off the tee week with the bad approach week. And just like that, he's an early ejection, misses the cut by 5, and you go nowhere. But what happens if he finally connects the two and he has the really good driving week with the really good approach week? We know that he's a really capable putter. It's just a really simple path to him being in contention, and I really like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and this is probably on me, just the way my mind works, right? Is I know he lives in the South. He plays a ton of Bermuda. That's where he's comfortable. He's definitely evolved. I understand the volatility side. I tend to overlook guys that I know are more comfortable on certain grass types and certain golf courses than I do. That's not even results driven, right? I'm not even looking at how they play in those events. I'm just going by what I know about him and where he practices.
Does it ease your concern at all if he gained over a stroke and a half putting last week?
Definitely. And I think he's good enough that he can compete. Like that's not the deal. I know this golf course has to be very similar to Craig Ranch, and I know he didn't play well there, and I know that he doesn't like it there. He doesn't go out there. And so when I feel like that correlation is as strong as it is, it just tends to make me look elsewhere.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right.
And like I said, that's more like I tend to let my personal emotions and experiences get in the way of like the analytics of it sometimes. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just more of the way that I think as a golfer and know if I was in his shoes, what my mentality would be.
One other guy I want to ask you about, Kevin Yu, is somebody who popped in the projections last week. And because he had spent so much time off, both Josh and I kind of took the approach of, we kind of think he's being overestimated in the models, not really going to go there. Now, he ended up only finishing 49th, kind of faded, but he was playing some really good golf, gained over a stroke per round off the tee once again, and is popping in the projections here again because of how good he is off the tee. Should we be considering Kevin Yu? Because the models really, really like him. In fact, we have him at 1.1% to win, and he is 120 to 1. So certainly some value there if we feel like the projections are accurately reflecting his chances this week.
Yeah, anytime you get a guy like that drives it that good, it's hard to not like him, right? If you get a guy that is going to go out there and drive it as good as anybody in the field, and you know how important that is week in and week out, it's kind of like you've got to be ahead of the curve on a guy, and I think this is an opportunity to be ahead of the curve on him if he continues to get better. And the other thing is, I love the fact that he got 4 rounds under. Coming back, he gets 4 rounds under his belt to just, I don't know about you when you were playing, but I always seemed like I played my best my 3rd week out. Like I would build my schedule around having my favorite golf course be my 3rd week in a row.
That makes sense. Yeah. So personally, like I always felt like it was a little bit random for me. I would never know when it would start to click and just feel like I was in the zone. But more often than not, I was probably in that range, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th week.
So so the 4 rounds, him being back 4 rounds, I think helps him. There was a couple of other guys out. Nikolai Hogard is an interesting one to me because I think he has a ton of talent and he just hasn't got to showcase it over here yet. I think it's coming. I would be interested to see your thoughts on him and how he projects for you.
He's 80 to 1, and I'm trying to find him 1% to win. So another guy in that category of not quite showing value, but close enough that if you have a strong conviction towards him, certainly is in play. Man, the guy is so good off the tee, so long off the tee at the very least. The interesting thing for him is he's one of the best wedge players in the world, it seems, from 100 to 150 yards. Maybe a little bit subpar 50 to 100 yards. Now, it's a fairly small sample size for him. So I would be a little bit inclined to say, like, if you're looking for a reason to say, you know what, I've got conviction on this guy. He's not quite showing value, but if I can find a way to maybe explain why he's a better play than what the projections say, I think this is where it is. It's unlikely that he's going to continue to be subpar just under 100 yards and one of the best over 100 yards. So if those two come together, if instead of being negative 0.02 with half wedges and plus 0.11 with wedges, if instead he's like plus 0.2 and plus 0.7, all of a sudden that's going to dramatically raise his projection here. And instead of being 1.1% to win, he could be 1.2 or 1.3 and showing value. So we're really trying to show a little bit of the process of how we select these winners. And I think that that's a pretty easy path that you can get Hogard showing value on. So I like this call.
And The other thing is, I think that in DraftKings he often gets overlooked because nobody really knows much about him. Especially if you think, if the models don't just project him super high, then I think he just kind of goes by the wayside. And I think another guy that I want to beat the curve on, I think he's got a ton of talent. There's only one other guy down in that range that I might consider, and that's Sam Stevens. Played good at Craig Ranch, shoots a lot of really low scores, drives it good. I would just be that, like I said, that's probably the only other guy down there that I'm going to kind of toy with in lineups. But once again, it's going to depend on ownership.
Stevens is an interesting one. He kind of fits the Eckroat bill for me, where it almost seems like there isn't a chance to be ahead of the curve on because he's everyone's favorite, favorite candidate to break out or something like that, along with Eckroat. So he's at 100 to 1. And let me see, where do we have him? We have him at 0.9%. So another guy who's like really close to showing value. You can get there if you really like him. He's not going to be a bet of mine, but really good off the tee in both aspects, good with his irons. I will say, definitely a guy who's a lot better, like in the mid iron range, upper wedges, mid irons, than he is at both extremes. His half wedges and long irons are both pretty poor. So I think that's what's driving his projection down to the point where we're not showing value on him. But I certainly like the call and certainly agree he's somebody else that we should keep in the back of our minds. This guy really might be a much better player than where he's priced week in and week out. I think like an easy way to think about it is who's somebody who's not going to be in this price range, both DraftKings or the odds market a year from now in a field like this. He's probably near the top of the list of somebody who could be significantly more expensive next year.
Yeah, and I think you'll continue to see that go up. Mm-hmm. Just like my call from last week, he's all the way, Aber's all the way up to 8,700 this week. Like, How about that? Like over $1,000 increase in DraftKings because of what he finished like 18th or something. Like, I don't think he.
And 45 to 1 in the outright market. That's the best available now. I mean, we have him at 1.3%. So like he is a step above the guys below him in our projections as well. But 45 to 1, I won't be getting there.
It's just one of those things that, like, how did he just skip that whole 8,000 range? You know what I mean? Like, we were ahead of the curve last week, but then, like, how do you come back and justify playing him at 8,700 or whatever this week? I just can't find a way to do it.
And that shows the value of trying to be ahead of the curve on these guys, right? Because like if you had him last week, he's the same player this week as he was last week, but now he's more expensive, still popular, still. The odds are now crashing down in the odds market. So if you wait to see it from a player, so often you just totally missed your opportunity to get any value of how strongly you felt about the player's talent and his potential to be a great player.
And I think that's the golf side of me that really helps is being able to kind of have my foot in the door enough still down here to see all the different people and hear about the people with all the ridiculous talent and just being able to pick out a skill set just by watching, not necessarily by what the numbers say. And, generally speaking, we get 5 or 6 weeks in and we're end up on the same player, you through the numbers and then my side of just knowing what I know about golf. So it is interesting the way it works and the way that it all seems to even out. And yeah, I think the biggest deal is all these guys is trying to be ahead of the curve. How do we get ahead of the curve and beat the field to a player, especially in DraftKings? Which oddly enough, I played all 3 200 singles last week and he was in the other 2 and wasn't in the one that finished 7th. So it's just the way that it worked out.
Yeah. Speaking of these types of players, do you have anybody in this week's field who's standing out to you? They could be down in that same price range, but it's a weaker field, so maybe it's somebody in the 8,000 or something like that. Anyone standing out to you?
I think Pendrith, if he goes overlooked, like he's one of my favorites in this field. I think that he has what it takes to win. I like this place for him. He was the biggest one. Obviously, I'm going to be all over Eckroat again. I think he's going to continue to play good and continue to get better. I did see somebody that I thought was way underpriced, but I can't remember who it was.
It's going to be interesting to see if we go back to Taylor Moore, because I'm really not liking what I'm seeing, but I also think he's a much better player than a 7,900 price tag in this field.
And the other thing is he played really good in Canada. And when I was up there, and this kind of golf course is very similar to what we played up there. Drive it good, a lot of wedges. In a lot of the courses we played that year, you could hit 4-iron off the tee and have 8 or 9 iron into about every hole. And the guys that, if you wanted to finish 30th, that's fine. But the guys that were winning, like Taylor, were hitting driver and hitting flip wedges in everywhere. So I think he's a great fit here. I know that he's played good on golf courses like that, or like this one. Another guy. Do you think that there's enough into driving this week that you have to consider Cameron Champ?
I wouldn't go there. When you mentioned driving, I thought you were going to go to Gordon Sargent, and I think that is a potential route. I feel like the thing with Sargent is the night. I think he's probably a better showdown play than anything else, because you need him driving the ball accurately. What he's shown so far is that he is potentially the longest guy on tour, but he's been fairly inaccurate off the tee as well. So you need the driving. Much easier for him to sustain that for 18 holes than 72. So you've got that in favor of showdown. And then also showing clear signs of being a really good scorer. So somebody who's going to make more birdies than what you would expect for their score, more bogeys as well, and be very volatile in that way. So I like the idea of going to Sargent here in this field for showdowns especially. But I think the guy that I'm trying to be ahead of the curve on this week is probably Kevin Yu. If there's somebody who stands out to me down in that range, somebody who's just potentially much better already than what their price and potential ownership, we don't have ownership projections yet, but what ownership will reflect, I think it's Kevin Yu. So we talk all the time. The number one thing that you need to be a really good buy low candidate is strong off the tee performance. He's one of the better drivers in this field as a whole. We just need the rest of his game to come around.
Yeah. And I'll be interested to see what kind of projections we get out of him of, how, he's got to be sub 5%, right? Unless this is one of those deals where in the 200 single, it's so analytical and there's so many guys that are, numbers based that he just comes, pops off the.
Yeah, I think he's going to continue to be really low owned because people are always afraid of the long absence, as we were last week, right? I mean, he was playing extremely well. He was gaining almost 3 strokes per round ball striking in his last 3 events, the American Express, the Farmers Insurance, and the Pebble Beach in late January, early February. But then the Travelers was his first event since then. So I think that people are going to continue to take the approach if they need to see it happen again before they bounce back in. As good as he was off the tee, he only gained a little bit with his irons, less than a tenth of a stroke per round. So I don't think people are going to jump right back in on him. I think we're going to continue to get an ownership discount on him. He's probably going to be one of my favorite plays on the slate. We'll see.
And then do you have anybody that you're going to lean on top of the board?
Man, this is a really tough one. I really think that this is a crucial week to wait for ownership before you start to develop any strong feelings about the top of the board. So many of these guys are projecting really similarly for us. They have varying volatilities, but honestly, like even from a volatility standpoint, Sungjae through Morikawa are all really similar in both projection and projected volatility. So I just think that we want to take a very game theory heavy approach at the top of the board this week. Where I will say there's potential for separation is Finau is well ahead of everybody else in expected strokes gained, and he's by far the least volatile at the top. So if you're just looking for, I think safety is a bad word. If you're looking for a high probability of success from your top player, I do think Finau stands above the rest. But
I agree.
if he's going to be 30% and everybody else is 15 to 20, then that probably negates that. So what we need to see is Finau owned similarly to a lot of the rest of the players. And at only 10-9, I kind of don't think we're going to get that. I think he's going to be mega chalk.
And so this is kind of the way that I look at that though, is I'm willing to, if I'm going to play a guy like you, I'm okay eating the chalk with Finau, right? They kind of offset. So I'm creating leverage on the field with one guy. If I have that strong of feelings about Finau this week, which I think, like you said, he's probably if I'm going to lean on somebody, it's going to be all the way up there, which I tend to not like to do. But I just think this golf course this week, there's so many things that just fit him. I think you can, if you really just think Finau's that good, you can create your leverage elsewhere.
So we got some pretty exciting news here. The Open Championship about 3 weeks away at this point, July 20th through 23rd, I believe. We're going to be doing a really cool giveaway promotion type thing at that time. You guys are going to be able to send your swings, video of your swings, to Justin and myself. You can choose to have us either roast the swing or provide some feedback on the swing. And then if you show us, proof of having a free trial or just already being a subscriber, something like that, the details still need to be ironed out. You will be eligible for some type of giveaway. But really exciting news. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to see all of your swings. What do you think of that one, Justin?
Yeah, it's always funny because I know you get guys like Homa and some of those guys that do it all the time, and that you get different people. And the COVID era made such a big deal of like these online instructors and people making like thousands of dollars of just like a 30-minute online. And I think this will be a little bit more fun. We'll have a good time with it. We'll be able to watch them together, and maybe we'll just do a couple an episode that we can just sit down and talk about and
that'd
just
be
have
great.
some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Let's see if we can go back to back, get some more winners in the DFS circle as well. Let's have a great week. Catch you next time.